The moment the power went out, I knew it was going to be bad. Not inconvenient bad, not I have to light some candles and eat cereal for dinner bad. I mean genuinely, dangerously, teeth-shattering bad. It was February, the temperature outside had dropped to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, and the ice storm that had rolled through Maplecrest Commons the night before had taken down 3 major utility lines on the eastern grid. The power company was estimating a restoration window of 2 to 3 days, maybe longer if conditions kept deteriorating. The wind chill was making everything feel like -20. My furnace, which runs on a natural gas system but requires electricity to operate the blower and controls, was completely dead. My pipes were already starting to make those nervous little ticking sounds that you never want to hear in February. I'm Jim Adams. I've lived in Maplecrest Commons for 6 years, and for 6 years I have navigated the minefield that is our homeowner association with varying degrees of success. I've won some battles. I've lost some. I've learned to document everything, read the bylaws like scripture, and never, ever say anything to Renee Winthrop without a witness present. Renee is the kind of HOA board member who makes other HOA board members look reasonable by comparison. She's the type who will cite you for having a welcome mat that's the wrong shade of beige. She once sent a formal violation notice to a neighbor for putting up Christmas lights on December 1st instead of December 15th. She is precise, she is petty, and she absolutely loves the feeling of power that comes from holding a clipboard in a neighborhood where nothing genuinely important is happening. Until now, the storm had come in fast and mean the previous Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, the entire subdivision was buried under 14 inches of fresh snow on top of a solid 3-inch base of ice. The roads inside Maplecrest Commons were a mess. The HOA had a contracted snow removal service, but the truck had gotten stuck on the main access road trying to plow the entrance, and the driver had basically given up and gone home to let things settle before making another pass. So everything inside the neighborhood was rutted, icy, and nearly impassable. Most of us had shoveled our driveways and the sections of sidewalk in front of our homes, because the HOA's sidewalk clearing schedule was, as usual, a fantasy that existed only on paper. My neighbor Carl, who lives 3 doors down, called me Wednesday afternoon. "You got heat?" he asked, and I could tell from his voice he already knew the answer. "No," I said. "You?" "Nothing. I've got a fireplace, but I burned my last 2 logs last night. I'm sitting here in 4 layers." Carl is 68 years old and has a heart condition. His wife Linda is 71. Neither of them needed to be sitting in a house that was dropping toward 40 degrees, which is where my indoor thermometer was already heading. I had a space heater, but it was electric, which was useless. I had camping gear in the garage with a small propane burner, which I wasn't going to run inside for obvious reasons. I was basically managing, but just barely, and I knew it wasn't going to get better. Wednesday evening, I started making calls. I found a company called Reliable Power Solutions, based about 40 miles away, that specialized in emergency residential generator rentals and placement. They had a large trailer-mounted unit that could power multiple homes simultaneously through a temporary hookup, and they had experience dealing with exactly these kinds of neighborhood-wide outages. The price was steep, but I'd already started a group chat with 7 of my immediate neighbors, and we agreed to split the cost evenly. The guy I spoke to at Reliable Power Solutions was named Derek, and he was straightforward and efficient. He said he could get a truck to us by Thursday morning, around 9 or 10, as long as the access roads were passable for a large vehicle. He told me the truck was a heavy-duty Ford F-550 with a trailer carrying the generator unit, and it needed a minimum road width of about 12 feet to maneuver safely. The main entrance to Maplecrest Commons was a 2-lane road, easily wide enough. Even the interior roads, while snow-covered, were wide enough if they'd been plowed at least once. I called the HOA's after-hours emergency line Wednesday night. Got voicemail. Left a detailed message explaining the situation, explaining that 7 households had organized to bring in an emergency generator truck, explaining the timing, and requesting that whoever was on gate duty Thursday morning be notified to allow the vehicle through without delay. Our subdivision has a gated entrance with a security booth, and the gate is staffed during the day by a part-time attendant. After hours, it runs on a key fob system for residents. Any non-resident vehicle needs to either be buzzed in by a resident or have the attendant let them through with prior authorization. I also sent an email to the full HOA board that same night. I have a habit of creating paper trails. 6 years of living in Maplecrest Commons will do that to you. I did not hear back from anyone that night. Thursday morning, I got up at 7 and checked my indoor thermometer. 41 degrees. I was wearing a wool hat inside my own house. I'd slept in a sleeping bag rated for 30 degrees, which had kept me comfortable enough, but waking up in a 41-degree house and trying to function like a normal human being is its own special misery. I made coffee on my camping stove out in the garage with the door cracked open, brought it inside, and called Derek at Reliable Power Solutions to confirm they were still on schedule. Derek confirmed they were leaving at 8, expected to arrive around 9:30 or 10 depending on road conditions. He had 2 guys with him. They had all the equipment they needed, and he just needed confirmation that access to the neighborhood was sorted. I told him I'd sent messages and emails to the HOA but hadn't received confirmation. He said to let him know if anything came up. At 8:15, my phone rang. It was Renee Winthrop. I want you to understand something about the way Renee Winthrop speaks on the phone. She has this particular tone, this careful, measured, I am being very reasonable right now voice that she uses when she has already made a decision and is calling not to discuss it, but to inform you of it while maintaining plausible deniability about the fact that she's being completely unreasonable. It's a specific kind of conversational manipulation, and after 6 years I can identify it within the first 2 seconds. Jim, she said, I got your message and your email, and I want to address a few concerns. A few concerns. It was 8:15 in the morning, 9 degrees outside, and we'd been without power for almost 18 hours. A few concerns. Great, I said. What time is the gate attendant being informed to let the generator truck through? Well, that's actually what I wanted to discuss, she said. See, the issue is that a vehicle of that size, especially pulling a trailer, has the potential to cause damage to the HOA's paved roads. Our roads are currently in a compromised state due to the ice and snow, and any damage caused during this period would be the HOA's responsibility to repair. I blinked. I was standing in my kitchen in a wool hat drinking campfire coffee at 41 degrees, and Renee Winthrop was explaining to me that her primary concern was road damage. Renee, I said slowly, people in this neighborhood don't have heat. Carl and Linda Peterson are in their late 60s, early 70s. There are kids on Birchwood Lane who slept in a house that hit the mid-40s last night. We're talking about a medical emergency situation. I completely understand that this is uncomfortable, she said, and her voice carried about as much warmth as the outdoor temperature. But the HOA has a responsibility to all the homeowners, and that includes protecting the community's common infrastructure. Bringing in a large commercial vehicle when our roads are in this condition is not something I can authorize unilaterally. You don't have to authorize it unilaterally, I said. You're one board member. Call an emergency board meeting. Right now, phone call or video call, I don't care. Call the other board members. The board meets on the 3rd Tuesday of every month, she said. I actually had to put the phone down for a second. I took a breath. I picked it back up. Are you telling me, I said, that during a declared weather emergency, with sub-zero temperatures, with families in this neighborhood without heat or power, you are not going to let the emergency generator truck through the gate because you're concerned about road damage and your next board meeting isn't until the 3rd Tuesday of the month? I'm saying there is a process, she said. And the process exists for good reason. What if everyone just decided to bring in whatever vehicles they wanted? There are commercial vehicle restrictions in our community guidelines, specifically Section 4, subsection C, which prohibits commercial vehicles over a certain weight threshold from using the private interior roads without prior board approval. There's an emergency exception, I said immediately, because I had actually read the bylaws. All of them, multiple times. There is an emergency exception clause in Section 8, which supersedes Section 4 in cases of documented public safety risk. I told her that. There was a pause, a careful, calculating pause. I'd have to review the specific language, she said. I'll email it to you right now, I said. Jim, I really think the best course of action here is to wait for the utility company's updated restoration estimate and see if the updated estimate that came out an hour ago says potentially 72 hours from now, I said. That's 4.5 days total, without heat. In February, no. I'll look into it and get back to you, she said, and hung up. I immediately sat down and drafted a detailed email. I quoted the emergency exception clause from Section 8 of the community bylaws verbatim. I copied every member of the HOA board, including the 3 other members besides Renee. I CC'd the neighborhood watch coordinator and the property management company that technically oversees the HOA. I sent it at 8:22 in the morning, and then I called Carl. Carl listened to the whole thing. He was quiet for a moment. She's not going to let them through, is she? He said. It wasn't a question. Not without a fight, I said. My thermometer says 38, Carl said. Linda's been wearing her coat inside all night. That landed hard. I told Carl I was working on it and I'd keep him posted. I sent the same email to Derek at Reliable Power Solutions, telling him about the access issue and asking him to hold for now while I worked on resolving it. He replied quickly, said he understood and that they'd been in situations like this before, which told me a lot about the world, honestly. At 9 o'clock, I hadn't heard back from Renee or any of the other board members. I made another call to the HOA property management company, a firm called Greenleaf Property Management, and asked to speak with someone in their emergency response division. They had one. A woman named Patricia who sounded like she had been dealing with HOA problems her entire adult life and had developed a magnificent professional calm about it. I explained the situation. I gave her the timeline, the temperatures, the health concerns with Carl and Linda, the Section 8 emergency exception, and the fact that Renee Winthrop was blocking the generator truck access based on commercial vehicle restrictions that were explicitly overridden by the emergency clause. Patricia asked me to hold. I held for 7 minutes, which felt like 40. When she came back, she told me she was going to contact Renee directly and also loop in the HOA's insurance carrier because, and here's where it got interesting, if the HOA denied emergency services access to homeowners during a documented weather emergency and someone was harmed as a result, the HOA's liability exposure was, and I'm paraphrasing her careful property management language here, extremely significant. I thanked her and got off the phone. Then Derek called me and told me they were about 15 minutes out. I pulled on every layer I owned, grabbed my phone with the HOA bylaws PDF open, and walked down to the front gate of Maplecrest Commons to wait. The gate area was a sorry sight. The guard booth had one small electric heater inside, but with no power, the attendant on duty, a young guy named Marcus who looked miserable, had been keeping warm with a battery-powered hand warmer and a very thick coat. The gate itself was on a manual override during the outage, meaning someone had to physically unlock and swing it open. Marcus had the key but had been given explicit instructions by Renee not to let any commercial vehicles through without board authorization. He showed me the text message she'd sent him. It was time-stamped 7:58 a.m. She had called him before she called me. She had already set the block in motion before she even had her polite conversation with me about addressing concerns. She had decided, and then she'd call me to make it look like she was considering it. I took a photo of that text message on Marcus's phone with his permission. Evidence. At 9:23, I saw the Reliable Power Solutions truck coming down the main road toward us. It was exactly as described, a heavy-duty F-550 with a trailer carrying a substantial generator unit. Derek waved at me from the cab as he pulled up to the gate and stopped. I walked over and explained the situation quickly. Derek, bless him, was unruffled. He'd been through worse. And then, like clockwork, Renee Winthrop's silver SUV appeared. She'd apparently driven from her house, which was on the other side of the neighborhood, and she pulled up to the gate from the inside, parking right in front of it so that even if Marcus opened the gate manually, the truck couldn't get through without her moving. She got out wearing a massive parka and a very self-satisfied expression. "Jim," she said, like we were meeting at a block party. "I wanted to come speak with the driver directly." She walked up to Derek's window and introduced herself as the HOA board chair. Derek looked at her, then at me, then back at her. "Ma'am," Derek said politely, "we have 7 households that have contracted us for emergency generator service. The temperature is 9 degrees. I have the equipment to help these people." "I absolutely understand that," Renee said, and that tone was back, warm and smooth and completely immovable. "But our community has guidelines in place for a reason, and a commercial vehicle of this size requires board authorization to operate on our private roads. I'm sure you understand the need for procedures." "I understand that it's 9 degrees," Derek said. At this point my phone buzzed. It was Patricia from Greenleaf Property Management. She told me she had reached the HOA insurance carrier, and they had been very clear that if the HOA was found to have deliberately blocked emergency services from reaching homeowners in a dangerous temperature situation, the HOA would be personally liable. The board members individually could be named in any resulting civil suit, and the insurance carrier might not cover damages arising from deliberate obstruction rather than negligent oversight. She asked me to put her on with Renee. I walked over to Renee and held out my phone. "It's Patricia from Greenleaf. She wants to speak with you." Renee looked at my phone like I'd handed her a live grenade. She took it. I only heard one side of the conversation, but I heard enough. Renee's expression shifted through several interesting phases. The first was confident. The second was slightly less confident. The third was that particular look people get when they realize the ground under them isn't as solid as they thought. She said, "Ma'am," several times, and "I see" twice, and "I understand the concern," but once. And then Patricia apparently said something that made her stop talking entirely and just listen. She handed me back the phone. "Patricia," I said. "She's going to move her vehicle," Patricia said calmly, "and Marcus has been authorized to open the gate. I've also sent a formal written notice to all board members documenting this incident for the record." I thanked Patricia about 6 times. Renee walked back to her silver SUV with a very controlled, very careful expression, like someone trying to look dignified while retreating. She moved the car. Marcus, who I could tell was deeply relieved, manually unlocked and opened the gate. Derek pulled the truck through, and I directed him to the agreed staging area near the community's central cul-de-sac, where we determined the best placement for the generator would give us cable reach to the 7 participating households. As the truck rolled past her, Renee watched it from the side of the road with her arms crossed, standing in 9-degree weather in her giant parka, and I have to be honest, there was something almost poetic about watching her be the only person in the entire scene who wasn't getting anything she wanted. The next several hours were something else entirely. Derek and his team were absolute professionals. They got the generator positioned and operational within about an hour and a half. The cables ran to 7 houses, all pre-consented and all with the appropriate connection points. When the power came back on inside my house, I actually said a small thank you to no one in particular, because the furnace kicking on and that first rush of warm air coming through the vents is one of the best feelings in the world when you've been without it in February. I brought hot coffee and soup out to Derek and his crew, and Carl came down with Linda to thank them personally. Linda was still wearing 3 layers, but she was smiling, which made the whole morning worth it. Several neighbors came out to watch the setup and celebrate the return of electricity. Kids from Birchwood Lane were out in the snow cheering when their house lights came on. In the middle of a miserable ice storm February outage, there was something genuinely warm happening in Maplecrest Commons, and it had nothing to do with the HOA. Renee had gone home after the truck got through. I expected that to be the end of it for the day, but I was wrong. Around 2 in the afternoon, Marcus called me. He told me that Renee had come back to the gate around noon, while I was inside getting warm, and had apparently given him a talking to about following proper procedures, and implied that his continued employment as the gate attendant was connected to his ability to enforce HOA rules. Marcus was understandably upset. He asked me what he should do. I told him to write down everything she said, as close to verbatim as he could with the time and date, and to send it to himself in an email so there was a timestamp. Then I told him to call Greenleaf Property Management because he worked for them, not for Renee, and what she'd just done was potentially workplace intimidation. Marcus did exactly that. He called Greenleaf. Patricia, who at this point I was starting to think of as a guardian angel in business casual, took the report and told Marcus his employment was not affected and that Renee had no authority over his employment status whatsoever. That was the afternoon of day 1. Day 2 was when things got really interesting. The power was still out in the neighborhood. The generator was humming along, 7 houses warm and functional. Other neighbors, the ones not connected to our group arrangement, were struggling. By midday on Thursday, word had spread through the neighborhood about what had happened at the gate, and people were not happy. The group chat I'd started with 7 people had somehow expanded to 41 people, because Carl had added people, and those people had added people, and now there was an entire digital town square of cold, annoyed homeowners who'd heard that the HOA had tried to block the emergency generator truck. People were furious. A woman named Sarah from Birchwood Lane posted that her 3-year-old had had a fever overnight, and they'd spent the night keeping warm with extra blankets and a battery-powered space heater, terrified. A retired teacher named George posted that his insulin needed to be kept within a certain temperature range, and he'd been monitoring his refrigerator carefully. A young couple named the Garcias posted that their newborn was 7 weeks old, and they'd been rotating shifts, staying awake to make sure the baby was warm enough. And then someone in the chat, I'm not sure who, posted Renee's text to Marcus. The screenshot circulated through the group chat within minutes, and the temperature of the conversation, no pun intended, went from frustrated to genuinely angry. People started asking questions about the board, about their own rights as homeowners, about what legal options existed. I'd been through enough HOA battles to know a few things, and I shared what I knew carefully without overstating what I was sure of. I told people the key facts. The HOA bylaws had an emergency exception that Renee had tried to ignore. The property management company had already documented the incident. Any homeowner who had suffered harm due to the delay could potentially pursue the matter civilly. And the HOA board elections were coming up in April. That last one, I'll tell you, got people's attention. By Thursday evening, Renee had apparently figured out that the neighborhood was, to put it politely, not feeling great about her. She sent a letter through the HOA's official communication channel, one of those bland, formal-sounding emails that uses a lot of words to say very little. She stated that the board had been acting in the best interests of the community, that the decision regarding commercial vehicle access had been made after careful consideration of applicable guidelines, that she appreciated everyone's patience and understanding, and that the HOA was looking into ways to support affected homeowners through this difficult situation. That email landed like a lead balloon in the group chat. 41 people reading it simultaneously generated 41 different degrees of outrage. But the person who responded most constructively was a man named Robert Huang, who I'd spoken to a few times over the years but didn't know well. Robert turned out to be an attorney, a real one, not the kind who says, "I have a friend who's a lawyer." He was a civil attorney who worked in property law, and he'd been reading everything in the group chat carefully. Robert posted a measured, methodical breakdown of what had happened, what the applicable legal standards were, what the HOA's duties of care were during a declared emergency, and what remedies were available to homeowners who had been harmed by a delay in emergency services access. He was careful to say this was general information and not specific legal advice, but the general information was illuminating, and it was enough to shift the group chat from venting to strategizing. I called Robert that evening and we talked for about an hour. He told me that in his professional opinion, what Renee had done was potentially actionable not just civilly, but, depending on the jurisdiction, potentially criminally, particularly given Marcus's account of the implied employment threat. He said if we wanted to pursue anything formally, we'd need a comprehensive documentation package. The original emails, the screenshots, Marcus's written statement, the property management records, the timestamps showing the temperature and power outage duration, and any medical records from homeowners who had experienced health issues directly connected to the delay in heating. I spent Thursday evening compiling everything I had. I organized it all into a folder. I had my original voicemail to the HOA emergency line. I had my emails with timestamps. I had Patricia's emails confirming the conversation and the property management notice. I had Marcus's written statement, which he'd forwarded to me after submitting it to Greenleaf. I had the screenshot of Renee's text telling Marcus not to let commercial vehicles through, timestamped before she'd even called me. I had photos I'd taken at the gate of the truck, the gate, and Renee's car blocking access. I had the chat logs from the neighborhood group showing the temperature reports and health concerns. And I had the security footage. I'd almost forgotten about the security footage. Our HOA gate has a security camera system that records continuously, stored on a local server in the guard booth. The camera angles cover the gate area comprehensively. Everything that had happened at the gate Thursday morning, Derek's truck arriving, Renee's SUV pulling up and blocking the entrance, Renee standing in front of the gate talking to Derek, all of it was on camera. I called Marcus and asked whether he could provide access to the footage or if I needed to go through a formal request. Marcus said the footage was HOA property technically, but that as a homeowner I had the right to request it through the management company for a documented incident. He said he'd already pulled the relevant clips and saved them separately on a flash drive because he'd had a feeling it might matter. Marcus, it turns out, was not just a gate attendant. He was a very perceptive human being. Marcus provided the flash drive to Greenleaf the next morning, Friday, which was day 3 of the outage. Patricia's team reviewed it and immediately sent a formal incident report to the HOA board and their legal counsel. Friday morning was interesting in ways I hadn't anticipated. The power company's latest update suggested restoration by late Friday afternoon or Saturday morning, which was actually better news than their previous estimate. The roads inside the neighborhood had finally been plowed properly overnight, because someone from the HOA's snow contractor had come through around 2 a.m. with a fresh machine, apparently after Greenleaf had contacted them directly to override whatever communication breakdown had delayed the service. My driveway was clear, the road in front of my house was clear, and the generator was still running smoothly. At about 10 in the morning, 2 things happened almost simultaneously. First, Robert Huang's preliminary legal findings were circulating through the group chat. He had researched the specific statutes in our state regarding HOA governance and emergency exceptions. He found that our state had passed a law about 5 years ago, in the wake of several high-profile incidents, explicitly prohibiting HOA boards from blocking emergency services access or emergency support equipment during officially declared weather emergencies. The governor had declared a state of emergency for our county 48 hours before the generator truck showed up. Under the statute, any HOA officer who knowingly obstructed such access could be personally liable for civil damages, and in cases where the obstruction created a documented health or safety risk, could face criminal misdemeanor charges. Second, Renee sent another email. This one was longer and more defensive. In it, she argued that a rental generator truck was not technically emergency services. Under the statute Robert had cited, that the decision she made was within her authority as board chair, and that she had ultimately allowed the vehicle to pass, so no actual harm had resulted from her initial decision to review the matter. She also, and this is the part that made my blood pressure jump despite the cold, suggested that certain homeowners had been creating unnecessary alarm and community discord by spreading misinformation through unofficial channels. She was talking about me, and Robert, and the group chat. 53 people were now in the group chat. Word travels fast in a cold neighborhood. The response to Renee's email from the homeowners was swift, and this time, much more organized, because Robert had coached people on how to respond formally and constructively. Within 2 hours, 31 homeowners had submitted individual written complaints to Greenleaf Property Management regarding Renee's conduct. Robert had prepared a template that was factual, specific, and professionally worded. Each homeowner added their personal details and specific experience. Sarah added her child's fever and the night they'd spent managing it without heat. George documented his insulin temperature concerns. The Garcias described their 7-week hold and the overnight watch schedule they'd maintained. Carl wrote about Linda's situation with quiet dignity that made me tear up a little when he shared it with me privately before submitting it. 31 formal complaints. In one afternoon, Patricia from Greenleaf told me she had never seen a volume of formal homeowner complaints come in that quickly in her career, and she said it with the tone of someone who had seen a lot. By Friday afternoon, the HOA board's other 3 members had quietly contacted me, individually, through personal email rather than official channels. Each of them, in slightly different ways, made it clear that they had not been aware of Renee's preemptive instruction to Marcus, had not voted on or endorsed her decision to block the truck, and were deeply uncomfortable with where things stood. One of them, a man named Phil who I'd always found reasonable in the few interactions I'd had with him, told me outright that Renee had a pattern of making unilateral decisions and presenting them to the rest of the board as if they'd been collectively agreed upon. That was a significant disclosure. It meant Renee had potentially been misrepresenting her authority repeatedly, not just in this incident. I shared that information with Robert. Robert's eyes, so to speak, lit up in the group chat response. Friday evening, the power company came through. At 6:47 p.m., the grid was restored. The lights came on across Maplecrest Commons, the streetlights flickered back to life, and a genuine cheer went up from several houses. I watched from my front door as house after house lit up, windows glowing warm and yellow in the dark February evening, and the snow in everyone's yards caught the light and sparkled. It was actually beautiful, even though everything surrounding the moment was a mess. I thanked Derek from Reliable Power Solutions and made sure the payment for all 7 households was processed immediately. Derek's team disconnected everything efficiently and professionally, and as they were packing up, Derek told me quietly that this had been the only time in his company's history that they'd ever been held up at an HOA gate during an emergency job. He said he was genuinely surprised it had happened and that he'd be referencing the incident in their operational planning going forward. I told him I didn't blame him. The weekend arrived, cold but functional. Power was on, heat was on, pipes were fine. The neighborhood was recovering, but the story wasn't finished. On Monday morning, I received a certified letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it, read the first paragraph, and had to sit down. Renee Winthrop had retained legal counsel and was threatening to sue me personally for defamation, claiming that my communications in the group chat and my reports to Greenleaf had damaged her reputation and contained false statements. I read that letter 4 times. Then I called Robert. Robert read it and was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed. Not meanly, just with the particular appreciation of a professional who recognizes a blunder when they see one. She's suing you for defamation based on statements that are fully documented and provable, he said. The definition of defamation requires the statements to be false. Everything you said is supported by timestamps, email records, security camera footage, and 31 individual witness statements. This letter is either a scare tactic from an attorney who hasn't reviewed the case file, or she's retained someone who doesn't actually know what they're doing. What do? I said. You respond, through counsel, that you stand by every statement you made, that you have comprehensive documentation, that you welcome the opportunity to present that documentation in court, and that you reserve the right to file counterclaims. Then you let me help you prepare the actual response. I spent Monday afternoon with Robert going through everything again. He drafted a formal response letter to Renee's attorney that was polite, precise, and devastating in its specificity. He listed every piece of evidence we had. He referenced the security footage by timestamp. He named Marcus's statement. He cited the state statute on HOA emergency obstruction. He included a note that 31 homeowners had filed formal complaints that were now part of the property management record. And he closed with a line that I genuinely admired, that any litigation initiated by Ms. Winthrop would necessarily expose the full evidentiary record of her conduct during the outage to public court filings, and that we were fully prepared for that. The letter was sent Monday afternoon. We didn't hear back from Renee's attorney all week. Meanwhile, the community was moving. Robert had been in contact with several of the homeowners with documented health impacts from the outage delay and was helping them understand their options for civil claims against the HOA. Carl and Linda were considering filing. Sarah, whose daughter's fever had required a doctor's visit the following week, was considering filing. The Garcias were talking to Robert privately. There was also the matter of the 31 formal complaints, which had triggered an official investigation by Greenleaf Property Management into Renee's conduct and her general pattern of unilateral decision-making. As part of that investigation, they requested a review of all HOA board decisions made in the past 18 months to determine whether proper voting procedures had been followed. Phil, the board member who'd spoken to me privately, agreed to cooperate fully. So did the other 2 board members. Renee declined to cooperate with the investigation. Renee declining to cooperate with the investigation was, as it turned out, her last major strategic mistake. The Greenleaf investigation, which concluded about 3 weeks later, found that Renee had made at least 6 significant decisions in the past year, plus that she had represented to the board as collectively agreed upon, but which the records and other board members' statements revealed had actually been made unilaterally. Several of these involved financial expenditures, including a landscaping contract that had been awarded to a company that, upon further investigation, was owned by Renee's cousin. That one wasn't just a procedural problem. That was a conflict of interest that violated the HOA's ethics bylaws and potentially constituted fraud, given that HOA funds were involved. Patricia from Greenleaf, who I had come to deeply respect, contacted me the Thursday after the investigation concluded to tell me that she was referring certain findings from the investigation to the HOA's legal counsel for further review, and that based on those findings, the board was going to be recommended to vote on removing Renee from her position as board chair, effective immediately. She also told me, carefully and professionally, that the findings related to the landscaping contract, and the cousin were being forwarded to the county district attorney's office because they potentially crossed into criminal territory, specifically misappropriation of funds and violation of fiduciary duty. She said this last part in the same calm, measured voice she used for everything, and I found myself genuinely appreciating the fact that Patricia existed in the world. 3 weeks after the power outage, on a Tuesday evening that was still cold but mercifully above freezing, the HOA held an emergency special meeting. It was open to all homeowners, and the turnout was extraordinary. The community center room that usually held about 30 people was jammed with 60-plus residents, with several more standing in the doorway. I sat toward the front with Robert and Carl, who had insisted on coming despite Linda's objections that it was too cold out. Linda had come too, because Linda, as it turned out, had a lot she wanted to say. The meeting was technically to vote on Renee's removal from the board chair position and her membership on the board entirely, as provided for in the bylaws under a formal conduct violation process. Robert had walked several homeowners through the specific bylaw provisions to make sure the process was correctly followed, because the one thing Renee's legal team would have looked for was a procedural error. There were no procedural errors. The vote was taken. Phil moved the motion. Another board member seconded it. The vote among the board was unanimous for removal, which meant all 3 other board members had voted against her. Renee was present. She sat in a chair near the front with her attorney beside her, and she said nothing during the meeting except to request formally, twice, that certain documents not be entered into the meeting record, requests that were denied both times. When the vote was announced, the room was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, and then about 60 people started talking at once. It wasn't chaos. It was more like a collective exhale. The homeowner community then voted on interim leadership while a formal election was organized, and Phil was appointed temporary chair, which seemed to suit most people well enough. Robert volunteered to help update the HOA's emergency response protocols to formally address generator and emergency equipment access, with specific language that made clear such access could never be blocked by a single board member unilaterally. That proposal was approved on the spot with applause. Renee left the meeting before it concluded. Her attorney left with her, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression that suggested this had not been his best week either. The defamation letter was dropped. Her attorney sent a 1-paragraph withdrawal to Robert about 10 days after the special meeting, citing his client's decision not to pursue the matter further. Robert accepted it with appropriate professionalism, and I accepted it with a glass of whatever wine I had left in the cabinet. 3.5 months after the outage, the county district attorney's office filed charges. The landscaping contract fraud was the central issue. Renee was charged with misappropriation of fiduciary funds and violation of the conflict of interest statutes that governed HOA boards in our state. The amount involved was not enormous, something in the range of $11,000 spread across multiple contract decisions over about 2 years, but it was enough to be a serious charge. Her attorney negotiated a plea arrangement. She pleaded no contest, paid restitution to the HOA in the full amount found to have been improperly directed, paid a fine to the county, and received a period of supervised probation. She was also permanently barred from serving in any HOA governance role in the state, which was a condition of the plea that her attorney had tried to negotiate out of and failed. The civil claims by Carl and Linda and by the Garcias were settled through the HOA's insurance carrier. Greenleaf had flagged that the insurance had to cover it because, despite Renee's unilateral conduct, the HOA as an entity had been the one to obstruct access. The settlements were not enormous, but they were meaningful, and more importantly, they were acknowledged. Carl told me afterwards that getting the acknowledgement mattered as much as the money. He said Linda had been frightened during those nights, genuinely frightened, and knowing that it was recognized as something that should never have happened was important to both of them. Marcus got a raise. I know that because Patricia told me, and I thought it was worth knowing. The April HOA elections were the most attended in the community's history. 68 homeowners voted, which was apparently 3 times the usual participation. Phil was formally elected board chair. Robert was elected to the board, which was a development that made me genuinely happy. A woman from Birchwood Lane named Diane, who'd been passionate and constructive throughout the whole ordeal, was elected to the 3rd open seat. The new board's first formal act was to ratify the emergency response protocol that Robert had drafted, which was now written into the governing documents as a permanent and binding policy. The second formal act was to send a written thank you letter to Marcus. That one was Phil's idea, and it was the right call. By the time May arrived, and the snow was a distant memory, Maplecrest Commons had changed in a way that was hard to precisely define but easy to feel. People knew each other better. The group chat was still active, but now it was used for things like coordinating the spring community cleanup and organizing a food drive and debating the relative merits of different mulch options, which is a surprisingly heated topic apparently. The community center was being used for actual community events rather than just the monthly board meeting. There was a level of engagement and trust that hadn't been there before. I would not say that I'm glad the storm happened, or that I'm glad we went 3 days without power in 9-degree weather. That was genuinely hard and genuinely scary for some of the people in my neighborhood. I'm not going to romanticize it. But I will say that the thing that came out the other side of it was better than what existed before, and that sometimes it takes a crisis to show you what your community is actually made of. What it turned out we were made of, when you stripped away the surface noise and the HOA newsletters and the fussy debates about welcome matte colors, was pretty decent stuff. People who checked on their elderly neighbors. People who pooled resources to solve a problem together. People who pushed back when something was wrong and kept pushing back until it was fixed. People who showed up to a Tuesday night meeting in the winter and voted and paid attention and stayed involved. And one extremely competent property management professional named Patricia, who I will be sending a very nice holiday card to every year for the foreseeable future. Renee Winthrop sold her house in Maplecrest Commons that summer. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved to a condo across town. The condos apparently have their own small property association. I hope, for everyone's sake over there, that the experience changed her. People can change. I genuinely believe that. But I also believe in bylaws, documentation, security camera footage, and keeping Patricia's phone number in your contacts, just in case. My house is fully heated. My pipes are fine. My driveway is shoveled. My neighbor Carl is doing well, and Linda has started a walking club with 3 other women from the neighborhood that meets 3 mornings a week, weather permitting. Derek from Reliable Power Solutions sent me a Christmas card, which I thought was a lovely gesture. Robert has turned out to be an excellent board member, which I predicted but is still satisfying to witness. And every time I drive past the front gate of Maplecrest Commons, every single time I give Marcus a wave and he waves back, and neither of us has to say a word about what we both know happened there in February. Some things don't need to be said. They just need to be remembered and documented, always documented.